All right, here's the story. This story was written in a pamphlet that was given out, Log B'Omer, in fact, by Chabad. It was a pamphlet, a story that was written in one of these, little story booklets with pictures in it, and on color and everything. And you can check up to see if the details. But this is what is written in it. It's a wonderful story. And here it goes. There's different versions of the story, but this is what was written. I asked the person, and he said that he checked it up, and it's true. There was a Chassid, and his name was Rabbi Shochet. According to this story, it was Rabbi David Shochet. He was from the Shochet family, very gifted, genius rabbis of Chabad in California, in the California area. Anyway, so he got an invitation to speak to a bunch of priests, young fellows that were just finishing priest school. I guess they were Catholics, whatever, and to speak to them about some subject in Judaism that he should pick. They wanted to hear. So he asked the Lubavitcher Rebbe. This is how it goes in the book. So he asked the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, yes, you should speak to them, and that you should say the story about Yisroel GOY. Okay, other people say that the Lubavitcher Rebbe did not tell him that. They said you should talk about charity, and he said, maybe I'll tell them the story about Yisroel GOY, and the Rebbe said yes. In any case, so he went before these priests. I guess they were just graduated preschool, whatever. And there was, how many of them? 50, who knows, 100? And he talked about the importance of giving charity in Judaism, and how charity is the answer to the world's problems, and that there should be rich people and poor people, but the rich people are supposed to give to the poor people, to give charity. And how the poor person the benefits the rich person more than the rich person benefits the poor person, because by giving charity, so it's a tremendous benefit to the rich person spiritually, etc. And he said, I want to tell you a story to illustrate this. Said there was I think this is in Krakow, city of Krakow, or Prague, wherever it is. And there was a famous rabbi over there that was called Yom Tov Lipman. And Yom Tov Lipman, he was a very great rabbi, and he wrote, in fact, the Tosfot Yom Tov. He wrote an explanation on the Mishnah. Very holy person. It so happens that there was a person in his community over there. A lot of Jews were there, who knows, thousands and thousands and thousands of Jews. And there was one person that was very stingy, a rich person, rich man, had a big, mansion. But he was very stingy, and he wouldn't give charity. People would knock on his door, and he would either not give them or give them a very small amount. And people said, oh, a Jew cannot be so stingy, and he must be, he's some sort of a how do you say, of a Gentile Jew or whatever, a stingy Jew. So they used to call him the nickname Yisrael. His first name was Yisrael, and they called him Yisroel GOY. Now Yisrael means a Jew, right? But they called him Yisroel GOY. And it was Yisrael, the Gentile, the non-Jew, Yisroel GOY. And that was the name that they gave him. Yisroel GOY. Not a nice thing to do, forbidden to do. You're not allowed to make a negative name about people. That's just what we learned in the speech of the Rebbe. But they did it. It was so obvious, and so such a big, a bother on everybody. Anybody could be so tremendously stingy that whenever they refer to him, see that house, they say, oh yeah, that belongs to Yisroel GOY, right? I passed by that big house, oh, the house of Yisroel GOY, Yisroel. And it eventually came the time of this Yisroel GOY to die. He was an old man. And he wrote a will, and he said that he wanted to be buried at the corner of the cemetery where the people that didn't have any money were buried or whatever. Or maybe, I don't know, no, I'm sorry, not that. Not. He wrote that he gave like $5,000, whatever, for his burial, which is a nice sum. And he said that he wants to have written on his tombstone what everybody called him, Yisroel GOY. Here lies Yisroel GOY. And maybe his last name, whatever. Anyway, it would be written Yisroel GOY. Yisrael, the non-Jew. Now, the word goy also means nation, right? It means also a nation, but in this case, it didn't mean that at all. Yisroel GOY. And that's it. So they took him and they buried him in the cheapest place in the cemetery. And they put in the cheapest place in the cemetery and gave him, and the rest of the money they gave to charity. Finally, he gave charity. And that was it. Barely they got 10 people to come to his minyan. The rabbi had to force, get 9 people to pay them something to come to the funeral. There's supposed to be 10 people to say Kaddish for him. Anyway, a couple days later, they at the rabbi's house, they're gathered in front of the rabbi's house, like after he finishes the morning prayer in the middle of the week, about 20 families. They're gathered in front. And he says, yes, can I help you? They said, well, we're hungry. He said, where do you live? He said, we live here, in your congregation. He said, well, what do you mean you're hungry? I mean, where have you been eating now? They said, I don't know. But all of a sudden there comes the president of the synagogue and the sextant of the synagogue. And they're holding their heads. They say, listen, we don't know what to do. In front of my house, there's like 100 families. The other one says in front of my house, there's another 50 families. And they're all hungry. They say they got what to eat. So he says, the Rav says, let's make a little quiet over here. He asked the people, what have you been doing up to now for food? They said, we've been going to the grocery store. We buy what we need. And that's it. I mean, you haven't been paying? No. The grocery store owner says, we don't have to pay. The people around, he knows everybody around there. So he asked a few more people, and everybody says, yeah, that's what they all say. They go to the grocery store, and the grocery store owner says, if you're poor, you're really poor, you don't have to pay. And that's what it is. So they go to the grocery store owners. There's like, let's say 4 or 5 grocery stores over there. And they say, what's the story? They say, yeah, at the end of the month, we get an envelope. We get an envelope from this Yisroel GOY. How much do we owe? We send it back to him, and he sends an envelope with somebody with all the money. He pays all the debts for all these people at the end of every month. And now he passed away, and the previous month was not paid. He didn't pay the previous month. All these people owe for their, what can we do? We can't, give everything away, food for free. So he goes around to all the different grocery stores, and they all say the same thing. This Yisroel GOY, at the end of every month, he would pay the food for all these people, but he would do it in secret. He didn't want anyone to know. He would tell all the owners of the grocery stores not to tell anybody about it. Not to say anything that he's giving charity, because people don't like to live from charity. They'll go to the store and they buy. So the rabbi realizes that there's a big mistake over here. This is the story that this Rabbi Shochet is telling to these priests, right? Says the rabbi realizes that he made a big mistake over here, that everyone was saying bad things about this Yisroel GOY. And because he didn't want to make a big deal out of it, he didn't want to be known, so he let everybody say whatever they wanted to. It didn't make him feel bad. So the next day on Shabbos, he pounds on the table and he says, listen, everyone, we made a big mistake. It ends up that this person that we've been calling unjustly, we've been calling Yisroel GOY, that really he was giving tremendous amounts of charity. And they went to his house, they saw he had a big mansion, but all the other rooms were empty. He just slept like in the front room. All that he had, he gave away. So he said, listen, we have to go tomorrow to I want everyone to go. We're going to go to the cemetery and we're going to ask forgiveness. So they all went to the cemetery, and there is this tombstone of this Yisroel GOY, but it's covered over with a big sort of a veil, a blanket or something. And the rabbi says, listen, we want to ask forgiveness from you. And people are crying, and they say Kaddish for him. And they say, we're going to dedicate a new school to you or whatever. He said, listen, and I made a little sort of and he said, an addition to your tombstone. You wanted it to be written Yisroel GOY. I couldn't change that. But I decided I made a change, and he pulled the covering over, and he saw that in the nighttime the rabbi had taken the person who carves out the names, whatever, on the titles on the gravestones, and he wrote under the word goy, he wrote kadosh, Yisroel GOY kadosh, which means the Jewish people are a holy nation. Mi kamcha Yisroel GOY kadosh, it says there, the holy nation. It says, therefore I wrote for you goy holy. The holiness of the Jewish people is that they don't think about themselves, that they give charity. They give charity to others. And he, to the degree he didn't think about himself, he just kept quiet. He let people call him what he wanted to, and he just, okay, that's the story. I personally have a little bit of questions on the story, because, it means that he allowed everyone to say negative things about him. He sort of encouraged everyone to speak negatively about him when he could have just said, but okay, that's the story. So after he finished giving the story, one of the priests came up to him and said, Rabbi, that was a beautiful story from this Rabbi Yom Tov Lipman. Could you repeat the story again? So he said, listen, the story took, 10 minutes, however long it took. To repeat it again would be very difficult. I'll repeat it, very short. So he told the story very quickly that there was a stingy Jew and he didn't want it, and everyone called him Yisroel GOY. And then they discovered he gave a lot of money. And so they changed on his tombstone Yisroel GOY kadosh, because it was a holy. He said, thank you very much. Is it all right if I come to your hotel room? I'd like to just talk to you. So he said, okay, no problem. He goes to the hotel room, comes in. Could you tell me the story again in more detail? So he tells him the story again. What's the guy wanting? So he said, well, my mother told me that story. The priest, my mother told me that story, and she said that we're relatives of that, either of that Yisroel GOY or of the Rab Yom Tov Lipman. I don't remember which one, but I think of Yisroel GOY. Anyway, we're relatives of that rabbi, that great rabbi, where my mother told me. So the Rabbi Shochet said, well, if so, it means if your mother said that and your relatives from this rabbi, if it came from her mother, it means that, if it's mother after mother, then you're Jewish. So he said, yes, I always sort of suspected that. And then, good. End of the story, sort of. Rabbi Shochet was years later, 4 years later, something like that, was in Jerusalem by the kotel, praying at the kotel. And someone came up and tapped him on the shoulder, and he turned around. He thought maybe he was taking somebody's place or something. That man wanted to pray there or something. He said, yes, excuse me. He said, do you recognize me? He said, I'm sorry, I don't, maybe refresh my memory. He said, you remember you talked to those priests? He said, yeah. He said, well, I'm that priest that came and asked you the story. It was a young man. He had a beard. He returned to his Jewish nature, his Jewish soul. And now he's a religious Jew, an observant Jew, and everything. And that's the story. The story of Yisroel GOY. And I asked the one who wrote it. His name was Rabbi. Anyway, Mendy Brod. I wrote it, and he said yes, he heard the story. That's why he heard the story. Good. Anyway, the point of the story is to give charity as a holy thing, to think about others as a holy thing, and that is especially true of the Jewish people. So the Jewish people, by their nature, are Rahmanim, they're merciful. Baishanim, they have shame, and they have Gemilut Chasadim, they love to do good. Their conscience bothers them if they do something bad. Of course, there are certainly Jews that are genuinely, not that way. You can see there certainly are exceptions to that rule, but in the essence, in the soul, when a Jew reveals his Jewishness, but it doesn't depend on doing Torah or commandments. The Jew reveals his Jewishness, you'll find, and I have found, that Jews always have this either revealed or concealed a little bit. The Jews love to give charity, they love to be kind, they love to have mercy on others, and they love to be helpful. Have a good day with Mashiach. Now, God willing, tomorrow, Friday, we'll finish this Sicha of the Rebbe's. Shalom Uvracha.